Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. It is a new year. It is week 18, which means the final week of the NFL regular season. Greg, I feel like I sound like my parents when they would always tell me, "Oh, appreciate things in real time because time moves a lot faster once you get older and stuff like that." And
Well,
every football season, I'm just at the point where how the hell is it week 18 already?
well, I don't know how many of your audience will appreciate this. I'm older than you, Buck. I don't know if you're a classic rocker in any way, shape, or form. I'm sure many listening are, but I saw today was the birthday of someone, and when I saw the age, I was like, "Wait a second, that can't possibly be true." So, do you know who Grace Slick is?
I don't.
Okay, did you ever hear of a band called Jefferson Airplane?
Yes.
Okay, well, she was the lead singer and one of the lead singers in Jefferson Airplane, which started in the 60s through the early 70s. They came out of Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco at a time when that was really, really big.
Yeah.
So I saw it today. She's still alive, which is wonderful. But I saw it today was her birthday. And I saw that she was 84 years old. And I was like,
Mm.
wait a second. That can't be humanly possible. That just
It's
can't be humanly possible.
just to bring it local, Dolly Parton 76 today. So
Oh.
it's enough to make anybody feel like time passes quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I
Absolutely.
just like I was like, wait a second, that's not really true, is it? Because sometimes we all think that you get older and you lose sight of the fact that means other people are getting older too. You know?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's something that you can only really appreciate the older that you get.
Yep.
And thus far it's just now starting to get to me. Now, I think a lot of Titans fans would wish this football season away a little sooner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Given the
Yeah.
results and a tough one in Houston that we'll talk about here in just a second, Greg. I do want to start quickly, though, since it's topical and we won't meet again before the national championship is played. We'll have Michigan and Washington in the national championship game. I wanted to ask you about Michael Penix, just because he's the biggest pro prospect in this collection of games that we well, at least at quarterback in this collection of games to come out of the weekend. And he put on a performance that I know you haven't gotten to see in its entirety just yet, but kind of how you view him. I know you've watched a ton of his games. I know you've seen a ton of Roma Dunze as well,
Right.
the stud wide receiver who's of course gonna be playing on Sundays. How do you kind of view Penix from a trait standpoint?
I did him this past summer, and I saw probably 300 dropbacks. So, which is again, I'm going to do him again, from this past season. But I thought he was a really intriguing guy to watch. I mean, he's got a quick, compact delivery, very little range of motion, can generate velocity. One of the things that really stood out to me when I watched his tape this past summer from 2022 was he looked to work through progressions and get the ball to receivers. He had a pocket mentality. He did not look to leave the pocket. He had the subtle movement to avoid pressure and deliver the football, which I didn't see the whole game the other night just because it's late on the East Coast. But I saw a couple of plays just in that game watching on TV where he did just that, where he was able to avoid, reset, and deliver with that compact delivery. And he throws an excellent deep ball, as we know. And I thought that he showed a high consistently level of precise ball location on different kinds of throws. He was able to throw with velocity. He was able to throw with touch. To me, at his core, he's a timing and rhythm passer who really executes and distributes the ball really nicely within the structure of the pass game. He's not unathletic. He certainly can move. I wouldn't say that he's what we consider a second reaction playmaker, but he's not a statue by any means. What consistently stood out, and like I said, I've mentioned this, but I think it's worth repeating, is he was highly accountable to the system and to the pass game concepts, and he executed it at a really high level.
Yeah, it's he just having had him at Indiana for a couple of seasons, and I know he dealt with injuries there. To see the way
Yeah.
that he's been able to grow and progress and develop behind a really a solid offensive line and with good skill position players has been really fun to watch. And of course, we'll get the opportunity to see him against a good defense in Michigan, who I know a lot of college staffs around the country are going to be looking to pick apart as far as hiring
Without
people away.
question. And it's funny because I didn't watch his Indiana tape, but I saw him play on TV when he was at Indiana, as I know you did because it's your alma mater. And at the time, just like Bo Nix at Auburn, you didn't think this guy was a high level pro prospect. And Then he goes to Washington, and all of a sudden it's like, wow. And
Yeah.
same with Bo Nix. It's like, oh, okay. But I mean, Penix, certainly what he's done the last 2 years. And as I said, I will see a lot of his coaching tape, beginning in the next couple of weeks. But, he's a fun guy to watch. I think to me, he plays the position the right way.
Yeah, I'm can't wait to for obvious reasons because the Titan season will soon be over. I can't wait to get into the draft stuff because there's a lot of fascinating prospects to talk about. But we've got the postseason between now and then to discuss. Just quickly on the Titans, Greg. There's not a lot to say that hadn't already been said. Titans fans know it. It's still the same kind of talent deficiencies, the offensive line struggles, the inability to keep the quarterback upright on a consistent basis, how much it's limiting their offense, all the same variables. This one just a bit more disastrous with some of the plays
right
that kind of allowed it to spiral that way. But for players who are looking to build upon this season and who I know are going to be a part of next year's roster, the work that Harold Landry has done to kind of get himself back to form coming off that ACL injury. He's at 10.5 sacks this year. Him and Denico Autry continuing to be disruptive up front. And there aren't many positives to take out of the Titan season, but I think that one in particular is something that a lot of people are excited to see coming to fruition, even if it's late stages.
I would agree with that. I mean, for whatever this means, if you look at the stats that indicate, pass rush win rate, whatever, again, that those are stats, and I like to see the tape. But I mean, obviously I'm not charting every single Harold Landry pass rush, but people might be surprised to know that he has a higher pass rush win rate than Max Crosby. Mm-hmm. Now, so Landry has done well. Obviously, he's still a relatively young player. I mean, he's not an old guy by any means. So he's certainly going to be back because he signed a contract. It'll be interesting. I mean, Denico Autry is the interesting guy because he's an older player. I don't know if his agent and himself thinks that he has a big, one big contract, which my guess is the Titans would not give him. But I don't know the answer to that. I could be speaking out of my you-know-what. Who knows the answer to that? Because I think there's going to be some, meaningful roster changes this offseason. So I don't know if they'd be willing to give Denico Autry, if he thinks he's going to get a 3-year deal at a lot of money. Is Arden Key a 1-year player, or did they sign him?
No, he's on a 3-year deal.
So he's back.
21. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's back. Landry's back. I mean, my guess is they'll want to address the corner position for sure. They'll probably need to address the safety position now as well. So look, without rehashing a lot of the things we have said, it's a roster that has meaningful weaknesses, and you can't address every single thing in one off season. So they have to prioritize and decide what it is they need to address in order to be competitive. Look, that's the bottom line. I mean, you look at this year, this has been an odd year in the NFL. Teams that we just assume would be great, the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Bills, they've been beatable, each and every week. So you just don't know how a particular season plays out. Maybe fans in Tennessee right now think, oh man, this team stinks and it's going to be 3-year. You never know. You know how that goes, Buck. You never know, hopefully through free agency, through the draft, you hit on a few guys, and Will Levis continues to develop and hopefully can stay healthy. Obviously, his health is a function of an O-line. We won't get into that again, but you never know. I mean, every season is its own dynamic, and what you expect in August is not necessarily what you get in early January.
Well, and it's such important context, Greg, because you mentioned the Chiefs and the Eagles and the two teams that were in the Super Bowl last year, the Bills as well, who could go for anywhere based on this weekend's results.
Jacksonville, look at the team in your own division. After last year, Trevor Lawrence was an MVP candidate, and they were going to, on their way. And you never know how each season works out.
Well, and just to kind of build off that in particular with those two, Philadelphia and Kansas City, because they're playing so much more football. They're going deep into the postseason. Yeah. It's so much more physically taxing. You get to the following season expecting, either similar results or a level of competitiveness that you associate this without necessarily applying the logic of, oh, no, they've just played way more football than anybody else did. This has ground them down to a pulp. Physically, and an offensive line unit for Philadelphia and a defensive line unit for Philadelphia, who were as dominant as any two units in the sport last year, look vastly different in 2023.
Yeah, and the other thing people don't lose sight of, and they might not think this is a big deal, but it is, and this because you know coaches and talk to them as I do, but the teams that get far in the playoffs, that takes time away from coaches doing what they want to do in the offseason. Not that they're unhappy about getting to the Super Bowl. That's not my point. But, teams whose season, like Mike Vrabel on staff, beginning, and Vrabel, and he's not going to be taking weeks off here. That starting a day or two after the season ends, they're going to start doing all their self-scouting. They're going to start watching every single player, every single scheme, however they break it down and categorize it. They're going to start doing that. And they're going to have a month on the teams that really go deeper into the playoffs. And that is important time for coaches. They want to be able to do that. When you're behind, I know when I'm at the combine and I talk to the coaches that went deep into the playoffs, including, Super Bowl, but even if you go, divisional round, championship round, so many of these coaches, they say, oh, I haven't had a chance to see, one piece of tape on a college guy yet. I haven't had a chance to do this. I haven't had a chance to do that. That stuff matters.
Yeah, absolutely. With week 18, I'm always curious how you guys on the matchup show handle it, because we've already had a variety of different players who have been ruled out because teams have clinched the postseason and things like that. We'll talk about the top seeds here in just a second. But how do you guys go about your prep? Because I know you're focused on matchups, but those matchups become harder when, for example, Lamar Jackson isn't going to play against the Steelers.
We don't do those games. We don't do. We're going to think of it this way. Obviously, we're on ESPN. Mm-hmm. ESPN has 2 games on Saturday. Okay. Pittsburgh, it means something to Pittsburgh. So it's Pittsburgh and Baltimore. So I'm doing a piece on Pittsburgh and their run game. We're not going to touch, Baltimore because Lamar's out. The game Saturday night is, maybe from a national perspective, people aren't super excited about it, but the winner of that game's in the playoffs. Yeah. And so that's in our show.
Texans Colts for
Texans Colts, right. Green Bay, if they win, they're in. We're doing that game. Obviously, Buffalo Miami is our big D block. That's our full segment game because that's a huge, huge game. We're going to do Philly. We're going to do Dallas. Those teams have to win. They have to play. But Andy Reid obviously announced Mahomes isn't playing. Harbaugh announced that Lamar's not playing. So we're not going to touch that. And we kind of knew that would be the case.
Yeah, crazy because the NFL sends out an email correspondence from time to time with facts and notes and things like that. And yesterday they sent out a packet of information that headlined 20 teams still in contention for the postseason,
right?
Which is crazy.
But some of those teams, have the old Steve Kornacki 1% chance, right. So we're not dealing with that. But obviously, like I said, because we're an ESPN show and ESPN has 2 Saturday games, it's the right thing to do to show those games. And as I said, the Colts-Texans game, the winner of that game's in.
Yeah, so let's start there. Having just seen the Texans with C.J. Stroud for the first time in person, Greg. A lot of things went wrong for the Titans in this game. A lot of things that the Texans were able to execute well, both offensively and defensively. They had Stroud back. They had Will Anderson back. And they made life a living hell for Tennessee. Now, in this game in particular, Houston's offense, Stroud is, of course, a story. He's been a very, very impressive throughout the course of the season. We've talked about the help that the offensive line has provided to him when Tunsil's been healthy and available.
And he left after 20 snaps in this game.
Right, and how big of a difference that has made for him throughout the course of the season. Also, how they've been able to find their running game and what Singletary has provided to them, kind of usurping, usurping Dameon Pierce, who we thought was going to be their lead running back, at least coming into the season, it felt like.
Yeah, I thought this was a very mature professional game by Stroud because the way the game played out, it didn't require them to throw 45 times. It didn't require him to push the ball down the field. He understood the score and flow of the game. I thought he played with efficiency and control. He made a couple of big time throws on intermediate outcuts. I'm sure you remember those throws. One to a couple of Collins, one to Woods. He has higher level arm strength, but more importantly, he can make every throw with the demanded touch or velocity, whatever is needed. So he was very decisive. When all's said and done, and this is obviously very hard, which is why not everybody can play quarterback at a high level. But quarterback's about getting the ball to the right receiver at the right time with the right kind of throw. That's what it is. Obviously that's very hard, but that's what it is. And I thought Stroud, for the most part, has played that way this year. It's funny, the play that I kept looking at, and we all looked at it in our matchup room, and because obviously it was a mistake. Maybe you know something about it. If you do, I'd love for you to tell me. The Jordan 9-yard touchdown.
Brevin Jordan, yeah, the tight end.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know from a coverage perspective who made the mistake there, because obviously the flat, they totally voided the flat and no one was there. And after the play ended, I could see Shakir on my coaching tape, just like, put his hands up like, hey, what happened there? So Al-Shaair, I meant, not Shakir, Al-Shaair. And I'm trying to, we all tried to figure out, what happened there, and
we asked them in the post game, Greg, and they weren't terribly expansive on specifics about it, other than to say that that there was a miscommunication and somebody got lost in the shuffle, but they weren't telling us specifics.
Yeah, which that's the right thing to do. Why say that, hey, this guy blew it, but yeah, but for the most part, this game did not demand that Stroud be aggressive pushing the ball down the field.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed watching him work. To the detriment of the Titans, certainly. And like I said, there was a couple of plays that you mentioned not wanting to take out teammates on the defensive side of the ball, and I don't think Ryan Tannehill took anybody out. But have you seen the John Wick movies, Greg?
I think I've seen the first two.
Okay. Well, Ryan Tannehill told us that in the post-game locker room after he went in for Will Levis, who, of course, sustained an injury, that he felt like John Wick at the end of the movie, which apparently is pretty battered and bruised, having to deal with, just moments where he felt like he didn't have a chance to execute what the offense is trying to be. And kind of like Cleveland when we talked about, several months ago.
Yeah, that's the problem. And we don't want to rehash all that, but you can't really run your offense. I mean, it's just too hard.
Absolutely. So keeping with teams who are playing for the postseason or who've already secured the postseason, Greg, I'd be remiss if we haven't talked about Joe Flacco yet, at least on this podcast. And I know he's not going to play this week. I know the Browns have it locked up. They're they're at Cincinnati for the final week of the season. But just how much Flacco and his skill set, even at an advanced age, how much that lends itself to what Joe Flacco does well, because I know he's played for Gary Kubiak when Kubiak was the offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. I know Stefanski has a lot of connections to Gary Kubiak and that particular style of offense, but just to see how much they're willing to let him cut it loose and aren't as restricted by the turnovers that he's going to have from time to time.
Right.
It's been really cool to see how much they're letting him work within the scope of the offense and not being so restrictive with him.
No, and I think, look, Joe Flacco, my guess is when he's 60 years old, he could roll out of bed and throw the football. I mean, he's just one of those guys that comes out so easily, Buck. But he's very aggressive throwing the football, and he makes a lot of throws, even in the last game where the numbers ended up being good. I think he threw for 296 yards in the first half alone, and obviously the second half was a different game. But he could have thrown 2 or 3 picks in that first half as well. He's an aggressive thrower of the football, and he understands the NFL. If it's one-on-one, he is throwing the ball. I mean, that's just who he is. And, sometimes that does get him in trouble, but it also expands their passing game, because now their passing game, not only does it stretch it vertically, Buck, but it expands it horizontally. And what I mean by that is this: not that many quarterbacks can throw the ball from the far hash with some depth to the other side of the field, to the wide side of the field. Okay. So now what happens is that their pass game is expanded horizontally, because that number one receiver to the wide side of the field, even if he's outside the numbers, if Flacco's on the other hash, to the boundary hash, he can make those throws.
Right.
So now the pass game gets expanded and it becomes more difficult to defend, whereas there's not a lot of quarterbacks that can do that with any kind of consistency. So, we'll see, but there's no question that this pass game has taken on a totally different look. Plus, the thing about Flacco, which is kind of, to me, it's kind of who they are at their core under Stefanski, is he's very comfortable playing under center, and he's very comfortable turning his back to the defense with play action, which is really what the Stefanski offense is about. Deshaun Watson is a shotgun player. So now you get so many more elements and dimensions to this offense.
You mentioned Dallas and Philadelphia with things to play for this weekend. Obviously, Dallas getting a win. I know
Yeah.
controversy at the end against Detroit, but still, what Dak Prescott and CD Lamb have done, it's no small feat to break Michael Irvin's single season
Yeah.
receiving and catches record. To do it in that uniform for that franchise, of course, it's been really fun to watch them throughout the course of the season. Both playing NFC East games this week. The Eagles are in New York to play the Giants, and the Cowboys are at Washington in their final game of the season. What I guess are you looking at in the matchup show that people can keep an eye out for on this
Yeah,
weekend?
we're gonna discuss the Eagles a bit because they've been struggling on both sides of the ball, and I think in the minds of many, maybe a surprise. It's hard to believe that at one point they were the last undefeated team in the league, which seems like that happened about 5 years ago. But they've struggled really on both sides offensively. The pass game has not been what people expected or what it was earlier in the season. Hurts has not played as well this year. The offensive line, I'd say, has not been quite as physically dominant. You mentioned this earlier that the offensive line and defensive line a year ago were just really dominant units, and neither one has been that. I mean, last year, for instance, they had the most third down sacks in the league. I think they had something like 32 or 33 third down sacks. And think about how important that is, because that's the money down. This year they have 12 third down sacks, and they're near the bottom of the league. So they've not been able to rush the quarterback, and their secondary is not very good at all. It's really a bad secondary right now with no speed. And and again, that's just obviously a bad combination, not being able to rush the quarterback and having a secondary that's just not very good. So, it's been a slog for them in every game for quite a while this season.
Yeah, and I know that Sirianni, because it's Philadelphia and 11 wins is
Ah,
nothing. Sirianni's been under it a little bit. Asked about his future and things like that. Philly fans and Philly media, they crack me up, Greg. It's just a different world in your part of the country.
yeah, it is. It is for sure. And they're not very accepting in Philadelphia. But no, they play the Giants this week. We'll see. Whereas, Dallas, on the other hand, they're playing Washington. I'm actually doing a piece on their pass rush in the show, and that's an area in this game where they clearly should dominate because their D line is really, really good. They move people around a lot. They have the second highest stunt percentage in the league. They make it really challenging mentally for opposing offensive lines, and the Commanders' O line is not that good to begin with. So you almost get the feeling that Dallas could win this game just on the defensive side, but they certainly can score too. And the Commanders have so many injuries on the back end. The people they're playing at safety and corner are not the players they really want to be playing with.
It's going to be an interesting week of football as we close out the 2023 regular season and get ready for the postseason, which is what we'll be talking about when next we meet. Of course, check out the NFL Matchup Show, whether it's on ESPN early mornings on the weekend. You can set your DVR if you don't exactly wake up as early as Greg or I do. Just make sure you can see it live. And
No one wakes up as early as I do, Buck.
Brother, listen, I'm telling you, I got up just a little before 3 a.m. the other day, and I thought to myself, the only person in America who's awake right now because after going to bed is Greg Cosell, because he's probably already at the office. But
not quite, but close, but very close.
And you can also check out the Matchup Show on ESPN Plus on demand. Greg, enjoy the final week. We'll look forward to the Matchup Show, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week when we can talk about some postseason football.
Thanks, Buck.